I've been in self-isolation for the last 2 weeks. Finding a family member had come down with a cough, my first thought was, well, it's not coronavirus. And then my second thought was, well, I cannot be sure. And then my third thought was, well, if I try ringing 111, I'll be not only in a queue, but I'll simply be told to go into self-isolation anyway. Well, the last 2 weeks haven't proved to be too difficult, and I'm glad to say I've not felt ill at all. But I'm aware that for many other people this week, finding that they've been told that they need to go into isolation potentially for 12 weeks because of feeling themselves vulnerable, being part of one of those vulnerable groups, I cannot begin to imagine what it must feel like to be apart, alone, for all that time. Lent, this season that continues, has been, down the ages, a time of self-discipline, a time for spiritual detoxing and spring cleaning as we prepare to celebrate the joy of Easter. And yet the fact is that this Lent is an experience like no other, and we don't know what Easter will look like for us. Indeed, we know that now our churches, at the instruction of our archbishops, have been closed, as we're all required to do our bit to try and make sure that we stay safe at home and save lives. Lent has been this time of 40 days of preparation down the centuries. I only learnt this last week that our English word quarantine itself comes from an Italian expression meaning 40 days. And in the Middle Ages, when ships came into port at Venice and other places, they were themselves quarantined for 40 days. They were to be kept at sea as there was fear that they might be carrying disease before those on board could come ashore and disembark. And that makes us think of those pictures of cruise ships that we've seen with people who've gone thinking that they were on the holiday of a lifetime that instead proved to be the voyage from hell. But 40 days of Lent has then been a time of quarantine, of being set apart. And indeed, the word itself was used to describe the 40 days and the desert in which Jesus spent this time of waiting and being tested. Well, it's clear that we are living through very testing times, and not just for 40 days, although that seems long at a stretch, even far longer than the 2 weeks that I've spent self-isolated. Now we're all being required to spend time as much as possible at home, and that can prove very isolating for many people. This time apart, this self-isolation and self-distancing from others is a testing time. not just for Lent, but beyond. But however fearful people can feel, and perhaps rightly so at this time, nevertheless, Lent, this time of waiting, of preparation, is a time of waiting now for the joy of Easter. And I believe that there is nothing and no one that can rob us of that joy.